So this is the 12th of November, and our topic for today is valuing community and collaboration, the second in a series of 3 sessions on shifting values. And last month was about valuing nature, and next month will be about valuing quality of life. And in all 3 of these discussions, when we break out into small groups, what we want you to be doing is thinking about what would it mean in terms of both policy and local action, and for that matter in your own lives, if we shifted our values to put nature centrally, to put community and collaboration centrally, to put quality of life centrally in the decisions and the actions we take. A couple of things to update people on. One is that we will be sending out in the next, probably early next week, or at the weekend, a survey to all of the people on our mailing list, which is about 370 people now, looking for some feedback on what we're doing, how it's working, how it isn't working, what you'd like different, and things like that. So, and it's set up on a website that enables you to answer it through the website, which also compiles the information for us anonymously, of course. But it means that we don't have to go through a whole bunch of paper and pull it all together. So expect to see that fairly soon. We did offer at the last meeting to or we asked for expressions of interest in study circle to look at 1 or more aspects of shifting values. We had about half a dozen people who expressed their interest in that. We're going to make the same offer today. We anticipate that we will be able to, once we've got a sense of how many people are interested in this and for that matter next month, look at setting up something to start in the new year. And one of the things that we've been realizing is both the advantages of being online, but also the disadvantages. And so, for example, we were hoping to distribute a guide to kitchen table conversations, but what we've discovered is that we can't get them pilot tested. Here comes Ron Rice. That we can't get them pilot tested even, and so we don't. And I think it's because inherently a kitchen table conversation is about sitting down over food and drink or around a table and talking, and online just isn't the same thing. And so it may be that we'll have to wait until we're through COVID before we can do some of that more person-to-person work that really we're all about. We're not really about being an online community. We're about being a face-to-face community. So that sort of thing, charrettes that we'd also talked about doing, will all have to wait. I don't think I have any other announcements to make. What I would like to do is turn it over to Jasmindra Jawanda for a few opening comments and to introduce our speakers. We have Ron Rice is in the room now. We're expecting Sharmake Dubow soon, and Clare Attwell is also here. And the speaking order, I believe, is going to be Ron, followed by Clare, followed by Sharmake. So Jasmindra, over to you.
Great, thanks, Trevor. Good evening, everyone. And I want to first of all honor the sacred lands, being the unceded Coast Salish territories. For myself, it's with the Wush'q peoples. To honor their lands and to always continue to walk alongside with them as they struggle not just with land use issues, but with racial inequity and housing and many other issues for Indigenous peoples here in Canada and around the world. But thank you for all being here tonight from Conversations from a One Planet region, our board. We're really excited and grateful to have all of you as community members showing up and being here with all of us. And tonight's going to be interesting because you're going to hear from people from the Salish Seas to South Africa to Somalia And so, you know, we're pleased and honored to have diverse voices here tonight representing diverse lived experiences. And tonight it's really about community and collaboration, and really about leading, engaging, and empowering community and collaboration. And with that being said, tonight I'm going to introduce the first speaker. Our first panel presenter is Ron Rice from the Victoria Native Friendship Centre, where he sits as Executive Director. And then we're also going to have Clare Attwell, a community artist and cultural community development worker, as well as Councillor Sharmake Dubow, who sits on our Victoria Council tonight. So here we are, and I'm going to now pass it over to Ron Rice. So thank you again for being here tonight.
Thanks so much. Sorry to be late. I'm on holidays this week, and I have my phone on silent, so I wasn't getting all the reminders I had set up for myself tonight. It's great to be here, and I'm certainly looking forward to the discussion. You know, we had a very interesting conversation in preparation for our Zoom call tonight, and I'm honored to be on this panel and to be with all of you tonight.
Just to let you know, Ron, we're not seeing you, only a picture. I don't know if you wanted to share video, but if you did, it's not happening at the moment.
Yes, we have a no Zoom video rule at home.
Okay.
I had meant to take this from my office, but unfortunately I didn't make it into the office this afternoon as I intended. So in considering the discussion point, I wanted to sort of bring us to a point where we consider pre-contact Indigenous value around wealth determination, and the simple concept that wealth was not determined by how much you have or accumulated, but by how much you gave away or how much you shared with the community. In looking at sort of one of the big examples of our economy, the potlatch system. A family would, on the surface, impoverish themselves to give and to share to the community, and it was seen to be sort of a great and generous act, and would help people remember the occasion. But what would happen is you would be invited to ceremonies, you would be invited to other potlatches, and people would return the favor. So it was something that worked in cycles. And if you carry that into modern times, when we are working to care for our community and to address the multi-generational effects of residential schools and the 60s scoop, and now missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and the issues related to poverty, and I put poverty in quotation marks, you have to start looking at things in old ways. We're actually working on a proposal last month for a big national foundation, and they asked us to respond to poverty in Indigenous communities. And what we have decided to do there is to challenge the concept of poverty itself. That in fact, some of the people that we want to help have many talents and abilities and skills, they just don't have money. So what we want to do is try and redefine wealth so that people feel empowered. And with that, we look to you know, some of the artists and crafters that we have in our community, knitters and weavers, for example. Some of the sort of the iconic Cowichan sweaters. We're looking to maybe do some disruption in that space and raise not only the profile of the Cowichan sweater itself, but to raise the value of them so that they are no longer a tourist trinket, and the knitters can, earn a living wage. Right now, they earn about $2 an hour knitting Cowichan sweaters. So that's some of the things that we're working on. The whole idea of art as wealth is something that we have been working on for a number of years at the Friendship Center, and looking at what we can do to help artists and carvers realize some financial success by putting their skills and abilities to work, and to find creative ways to procure their items for them year round, so that they're not reliant on a season, but that they can find some way to live throughout the year. And then we sort of do the work of monetizing it for them. And maybe that's where I'll leave it. I do have some other points, but I'll hold on to those. Thanks.
Thank you, Ron. What we'll do is we'll jump to Clare, and then, assuming he comes in by then, to Sharmake.
He is here.
Oh, is Sharmake in?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, oh, perfect. Hi. Sorry, just wanted to check you were here. I hadn't seen you come in on the list. So we'll go to Clare now, and then we will go to Sharmake. And then I think, as Ron said, he's got some additional points he'd like to make, perhaps. So we'll maybe have a bit of a discussion between the three of them a little bit before we go to the larger group. So, Clare.
Hey, and it's just so amazing to hear the things that are happening at the Native Friendship Center and what you're doing. So obviously will resonate really well with what I'm going to be saying. So I can only scratch the surface in the small amount of time that I have to share with you on this, but hopefully it will start a conversation. And it's about a significant problem that cuts to the heart of the questions that we as societies keep finding ourselves asking. And those are, and I know they're really big questions: what happened to the wisdom in our decision making? How did we stray so far from being able to respond coherently to the crises that we face? And then more importantly, what can we do about it? Yeah, and I believe that Sharmake will be sharing with you shortly, but they're concepts that almost all of us are already familiar with in our everyday lives. So Jeremy Lent, who inspired this series for Conversations for One Planet region that we're doing right now, said, many visionaries and deep thinkers today recognize the need for a new global consciousness based on an underlying and all-infusing sense of connectedness. The meaning we derive must arise from our connectedness if we are to succeed in sustaining our civilization into the distant future. Connectedness within ourselves, to other humans, and to the entire natural world. And Fridtjof Capra states that at the forefront of contemporary science, the universe is no longer seen as a machine composed of elementary building blocks. We have discovered that the material world is a network of inseparable patterns of relationships. Evolution is no longer seen as a competitive struggle for existence, but rather as a cooperative dance in which creativity and the constant emergence of novelty are the driving forces. And with the new emphasis on complexity, networks, and patterns of organization, a new science of qualities is slowly emerging. So this involves a new kind of thinking in terms of relationships, patterns, and context. In science, this way of thinking is known as systems thinking or systemic thinking. Societal networks are networks of communications. Like biological networks, they're self-generating, but what they generate is mostly non-material. Each communication creates thoughts and meanings, which give rise to further communications, and thus the entire network generates itself. Thus, mapping the data, the learning and the wisdom that emerges requires new forms of listening and reporting from those data capturing methods that we traditionally use. And what do I mean by that? We're pretty good at collecting demographic data, growth curve shifts in consumer spending, indicators of progress in curbing carbon emissions, or information specifically about our community's well-being, such as the Victoria Foundation's Vital Signs annual report. And yeah, this was specifically about Victoria, and it's very useful, but when we extract data from a context, we miss important insights that might completely change what that data means. So Alfred Korbinski's statement of the map is not the territory is an attempt to say that. And so as an example of that, when we sing together, there's a feeling, the feeling of collective harmonious rise of the music is not the same as reading that same music written down on a music sheet. Despite the fact that the sheet music can be very useful, it can't capture that feeling of collective oneness, of feeling that you are part of something much bigger than yourself. And yet, our standard data collection systems are programmed to capture data that is coherent to a market-based system rather than a living system concerned with improving the quality of the relationships within it. So as system scientist and award-winning filmmaker Nora Bateson says, we're good at extracting data from the context, but not so good at putting it back into context, which is a problem. It's also why she's devoted the last several years to exploring and researching what she calls warm data. There's another reason we need to value the role of communities in responding to change, because place-based communities are where the rubber hits the road first. It's where the impact of change is felt directly, whether it is being displaced because of the fires in California, finding yourself unemployed and homeless during COVID, and discovering that having a pet excludes you from most shelters, or noticing the changes in salmon migration in your local river. Though some of that data may be captured, likely it wouldn't have captured the bit about the busker who gave away his earnings to the homeless guy who was able to pay a night's accommodation where they accepted dogs. And there was a story on CBC the other day about that. Or the child who grew up to become an ecologist because she wanted to restore the local ecosystem. Because that data was about something quite different from the questions being asked. So what gets lost when information is abstracted to fit the needs of bureaucrats and politicians? How do we ensure that what needs to be communicated through that information is indeed heard, so that the wisdom of the whole system is in turn structurally sound? And the corollary of that is perhaps reflected in a community feeling heard because they see their priorities being implemented through policy. This brings me to the main point I'm wanting you to consider, and that is, if we take seriously that we need to stop moving from a perpetual growth-based economy to one based on qualitative growth, we need to take seriously how we improve the quality of that growth. This means that we need to understand how to create the conditions for strengthening the network of relationships, because unlike centralized bureaucratic systems, social networks are emergent and people are empowered by being connected to the network. In such a network, the success of the whole community, and Friedrich Capra had done quite a bit of gathering of information on this, and he says, in such a network, the success of the whole community depends on the success of its individual members, while the success of each member depends on the success of the community as a whole. Any enrichment of individuals due to increased connectedness in the network will therefore also enrich the entire network. In social networks, the hubs with the richest connections become centers of power because they connect large numbers of people to the network. They are sought out as authorities in various fields. Thus, in a social network, the centers of power are centers of both empowerment and of authority. However, the evolution of what happens within those interactions is not only difficult to capture, our current systems are not capable of capturing and meaningfully synthesizing what else is revealed in the data, even if it is done very well. So how would a bureaucrat in an office in another city or province know what to find? Know that trying to find a shelter if you have a pet is an impediment to accessing a shelter, unless that question had been asked in the data collection. So it's those organizations operating at the local level where much of the detail of interactions within a network are experienced. However, there is a problem, and it's a large societal problem. We have an entire system that understands how to support and measure quantitative growth pretty well, but qualitative growth not so well. In fact, even articulating that there is a problem is hard to do when we have so meagerly invested in creating the conditions for qualitative growth that we get data that looks like this from, there are very few reports on the status of nonprofits. This one was done out of Vantage Point through the with the collaboration of the Vancouver Foundation and the Victoria Foundation, and it came out in May this year. But so for such a major report that's quite rare, they had 4.3% of nonprofits in BC respond. And out of those, very few have staff. And so, most of the responses were from those that do have staff and that had charitable status, which makes them a bit bigger. So there's a whole sections that are just completely missing from this report. So really, really skimpy data. But the data they did collect showed a really dire picture. 19% of nonprofits have closed since COVID started, and 23% are not sure that in 6 months' time they'll still be open. And then in this report by the Victoria Foundation in 2018, and again, really rare capturing of where things are at for nonprofits. I just have to move this. So I'm just going to read this bit by the researchers. Research at the regional, national, and international levels on the social impact of civil society has been scattered and inconclusive. There exists no consistency on indicators, frameworks, or at the scale with which impact is measured. So, sorry. So when we don't measure meaningfully, we don't recognize problems or opportunities, and we also don't understand how to support and fund this work. Essentially, what's not measured becomes invisible to the system. So in another report by, so I'm just about done here, by the Vantage Point, they were presenting to the BC government for the budget for 2021. They give another rare glimpse into the state of nonprofits in BC. So I had a slide here. Oh, I wonder why. Okay.
So Claire, we do need to get to Sharmake.
Yeah. Okay. So my finishing piece is just to say, when organizations serving the needs of their communities are precariously funded and undersupported, they can dissipate energy in organizational dysfunctional behavior and detracting from their effectiveness in carrying out their mission. This adds up to a net loss for both the health of the organization as well as the potential to the community. Considering that they represent the lifeblood of a community, it is a big, we should be really thinking that these are alarm bells, and we should be paying attention to it. And so my question to you is, how do we create the conditions for improving the quality of growth of the network? We are doing some of that here with conversations, but what do we need to do to support this work further? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And so now can we go to Sharmake, please? And Sharmake, thank you for joining us, particularly because I understand you've had a council meeting running late and you may have another one starting at 6. So we really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, you're right. we just finished the committee of the whole meeting and the council meeting. We start since 9 a.m. and we go back to public hearing at 6:30. So I might leave at 6 to have a 30 minutes dinner, then I can go back to serving the community. So thank you so much for joining with you all. It's such a pleasure. And I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from City Hall, and which is located the Lonquankan speaking people, Songhees Nation and Squamish. And particularly for me, it's very important to do land acknowledgement. Someone who arrived in Canada, and Canada gave it to me home, and being in and finding stability and citizenship, but also the privilege to serve. So for me, it's very important to do the land acknowledgement, as I have been displaced in my own home. In order to do that, I just like to share a quote that I really love. The Senator McClure, who is Indigenous as well, he was speaking to newcomers, which I am one of them. And I love what he said, and I like sharing that because it speaks very loud to me. And he said, you might not have the responsibility for the past, but you do have a responsibility for the future, because you made a commitment to this country, and the responsibility for the future is reconciliation. So that means you still have to understand what this history is. You have to understand what it has done to this country. You have to understand what it's doing to this country, and you have to understand what it will continue to do unless we change it. And the leadership from those newcomers, communities that are occupying more and more leadership positions in a government, also need to figure out where they fit into that dialogue around change for the future, because they do fit and they're going to be influential leaders of this conversation. So for me, someone who is in a local government, someone who has the residents of Victoria interested in me to make decisions on behalf of them, I always ask myself, how do I fit in reconciliation in my new home? And that is very important. And one of the things I really passionate today, I really want to talk about is that how do we leave no one behind when we make policies, when we make decisions, and when we serve the community. And to me, that is very important, because if we don't leave no one behind, then I believe the best Canadian I could be is playing a role in reconciliation. And for me, playing that role is leaving no one behind. And as a local leader, as a city leader, we've been responding to a range of issues, sometimes very difficult, sometimes complicated jurisdictions on things we deal with. And COVID-19 has highlighted the importance, again, leave no one behind principle. And it also revealed the interconnectedness of our community members. You know, if you're elder, if you're young, if you're newly arrived immigrant, however you are, we are all interconnected. And that is what the COVID-19 has shown. We've seen mutual aid and support. We've seen neighbors supporting each other, one another. So then the question becomes, how do governments, all levels of government, local, provincial, and federal, to ensure safe and equitable access to services, and everyone have the access to dignity, quality of life, and access to well-being That is very important. And when we come to city level, research showed that in many cities across the world, including in Canada, here at home, that within our city, there is chronic disparities between the have and the have-not. And usually they are concentrated in low-income neighborhoods that also experience a host of other social inequalities, including residential exclusion, expulsion, higher rate of children, youth, and seniors living in poverty. And I'm glad the brother mentioned how we see how we define poverty, and I look forward to hearing more about that. And low rates of quality of life, including lack of services, community facilities, low walkability, and barriers to access public transportation. And I can, list again and again. So the question is, which I will end, is then how do our city budget and our policies really think about those neighborhoods? And one of the things that the concept we were looking at is equity framework, and how does that reflect in our decision making? And when you do that, Jasmine is actually really doing a lot of work on this file, and Victoria Barr, who is also advocate in the community, is you asking questions: who benefits the programs and services and decisions you make? Who will be excluded those benefits, and who will be harmed? And how might some population groups be unfairly burdened today or in the future? And how might existing privilege be further entrenched? And how important the decision be made with direct input of those who will be the most impacted and affected by the decisions. And like today, we discussed about senior strategy that we have. So it's very important to end, whenever we make decisions, there must be a tools to have, so then you make a better public policy. And if you don't have those tools, if you don't ask those questions, then you don't know who you're serving, and you don't know what impact your decisions have. And that's every day what makes me awake and what makes me keep going, so that how do we change cultural shift and transformational change for generations to come. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sharmake. I know, Ron, that you said you might have something to add. So having heard now Sharmake and Clare, if you have something you'd like to add, please do. Otherwise, I will ask Jan Ingalls if she would facilitate some discussion amongst all of us for the next 10 or 15 minutes.
Sure. Maybe just briefly, I'll just talk a little bit about this idea of the importance of the questions we're asking and the data we're collecting and the stories that are being retold. For those of you who may have visited the Victoria Native Friendship Centre over the last maybe 12 or 13 years, we have had a project called the Eagle Project. It was an employment and training program that was struggling in its early days. The cohorts were running half full. The participants weren't necessarily showing up on time or staying all day or participating at their full capacity. And the ones who did finish, only about half of them ended the program with a full-time job or full-time enrollment in post-secondary. And in 2009, we decided it would be a good idea to add some sort of cultural element. And we decided to go big, and we added a totem pole. So if you came to training on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and you were on time and you participated, then you got to carve so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you did training. And then on Thursdays and Fridays, the participants would all carve on the totem pole, these 20-foot totem poles. And at the end of the year, we called everyone back, all the 3 cohorts, and asked them to bring someone who inspired them to participate in the program. It should be noted that about 95% of the people who signed up for the program finished the program, and 100% of the people who finished the program came out of it with either a full-time job or enrolled in full-time post-secondary education. So very successful. Checking all the boxes. Did people sign up? Yes. Did people finish the program? Yes. Did people achieve their goals? Yes. 3 boxes, 3 check marks. But what we saw at the totem pole raising, which is what we did in June of 2009, it was to wild fanfare. There was drummers and singers from all over the island. There was about 1,100 people who came to witness the pole raising, and the pole was standing, and everybody was moving to the backyard of the Friendship Center for a big picnic lunch. And I had left my bag on my seat, so I went back to the front to pick it up, and there was one of the young men who had participated in the program, and his 4-year-old son, who was coming to our preschool at the time. It's now been converted into a daycare, but who was coming to our preschool. And he said, "Come over here, I want to show you something." And the little boy hopped up onto the pedestal where the pole had just been raised. And the man asked his son to put his hand up as high as he could. So the little boy reached up as high as he could to touch the totem pole. And he said, "Daddy made this for you. Every time you come to the Friendship Center, I want you to remember how much I love you and how much I want for you. Do you understand?" And he just said, "Yes, Daddy." And he hopped off, and off they went for lunch. So I was a basket case sitting out there by myself, sobbing at this beautiful scene. And we did it again. We ran the program for a second year, all of the same success, all of the same beautiful stories. And then the third year, the funder said, "Well, it's time to submit your proposal again. I've heard you've had some really great successes. We're excited to see your proposal." So we submitted it with some adjustments, and they contacted us 3 months later and said, "This is beautiful. This is amazing. We're going to do everything except the totem pole." Well, the totem pole is the part that makes it successful. Yes, but we don't fund public art. So you need to withdraw the proposal or withdraw the totem pole, but you can't do both. So we decided to withdraw the proposal. In hindsight, we should have gotten them to say no, but we withdrew the proposal. We found some private money to run the program for 3 months instead of a year. And what I usually do, and when I'm touring around, especially with new government relationships, is to show them these totem poles as not public art, but public record. These are monuments to the achievements of these individuals and these families, and we are not checking enough boxes. So to know how many people signed up and how many people finished and how many people had jobs is not enough. We're not keeping score correctly, because in fact, what we should be doing is measuring this over a 25-year period. And when that little 4-year-old boy comes back with his children and says, "Your grandfather made this for me and now I'm giving it to you. I want you to know how much I love you and how much I care for you," we need to measure his success compared to his father's, and we need to measure those children's arc of success compared to their father. So I think in looking at everything that Clare and Sharmake have just said, it sort of ties it all up that, we might not have all the answers to everything, but we need to make sure we're asking all the right questions. And I think that was just sort of the point I wanted to leave off with.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for those great themes and stories and stimulation for discussion. And we will be going into small groups so that people can actually discuss these more. But there is just a very brief amount of time here. If there's anybody that has a a question, not a discussion, but like if there's something that you were wanting a bit more clarification on, or a little bit more from one of the presenters, we'll just have a few minutes now before we actually go into the small groups. So if anybody wants to kind of raise their hand up or something and let me know, then we can have a little bit of time before the presenters have to leave and before we go into the small groups, just to see if there's a clarifying question that you would like to find out before you go into your own discussion group. Or if there's something between the panelists, there's no one that seems to be saying yet that they want to ask anything. So maybe there's something from Sharmake or Clare in response to what you've heard.
Well, I would like to just say how much I appreciate Ron sharing that story, and the differentiation between the different kinds of data collection, that we can even start to get our heads around it. And that when you've got a real story that has flesh on it, that people get it, we can see that. But that the other kind of data collection is also important, because you're also working within a system that requires the data that shows the stuff that some of the reports are doing, but that both need to exist because the other loses that. So thank you. And I love the what you were talking about with the equity framework, Sharmake. We need to be doing more of that.
And Sharmake, before I go, I know that you're going to have to rush off and be over to eat so that you can go back into this hard work of doing city council work about issues to do with how people need to show up and be have access and impact, equity and impact. So if there's anything that you wanted to say before you left in terms of anything that Ron or Clare mentioned.
I think I love system change, and it's not overnight. We just beginning this work right now, and it's gonna take time. And so, like in our first pilot project, to have those questions in our city budget would be in 2022. So that shows that it will take time. But I think when the public are engaged and when the public are part of the decision making and policy, is very interesting, because now we have little portion of the city budget as a participatory budget, which is just concluded all the projects. And the idea was we allocated $60,000 that the public would decide where that money would go, and the community will come up with the projects. Very exciting, very democratic, because we don't decide, the public decides. And I think it also helps people who are not engaged with local government to civically participate. I wonder if I go on the street and stop random people and say, where is the city hall? How many people will point, even if they're near the building, that this is the city hall? I just wonder how many people would have that awareness, that engaged with local government. And I hope that more people get engaged with the local government, because we are the ones that make everyday decision, from your traffic light to water, which is sometimes even water people don't talk about as equity issue, you know, quality of water, context of that also is equity. And especially a lot of UN reports shows that. So just to conclude is how do we bring on board so many people, their their realities and experiences, but also create a community where everyone has access to dignity, quality of life, and well-being. At the end of the day, it all comes to that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can throw in a couple of thoughts in response to some of what I've been hearing, and particularly Ron, for example. There is an aphorism. These are really a couple of aphorisms. They're things that I use all the time in my work and have done for decades, really. The first is an aphorism from John McKnight, who said that institutions learn from studies and communities learn from stories. And I think your story really illustrated that all this woman could see, this bureaucrat could see, was that you didn't check the right boxes and you didn't deliver their numbers, but the story, which was much more profound, was lost to her. And Sharmake, I'm reminded of I think it's a French philosopher called Raymond Aron, who said that when inequality becomes too great, the idea of community becomes impossible. And I don't know if we're at that point yet in Victoria, but it worries me that we're approaching that. They're certainly way past that in the US, and we do not want to go there. So I think that how do we become we and not us and them is really an almost existential challenge we face today.
Mm-hmm.
So the other story that comes to mind, this idea about connecting has become more important as we discover some truths about our collective history. And a few years ago, I was asked to join the team at Pacific Opera Victoria to do community engagement for a production they were doing called Missing. And the subject of the opera was murdered or missing Indigenous women and girls. And when they asked me, I was very gracious in saying no, that it really didn't feel like a good fit for me and my skills and my network. And, the phrase, "What do I know about opera?" came up a few times. And Ian Rye and Carrie Newman, Ian's the CEO, and Carrie Newman, many of you might know, is on their board of directors, were very insistent and said, "No, we think this needs some attention, and you'd be good at this." So I went in and sort of came to this conclusion that opera, which is often seen as this very elite art form, how are Indigenous communities going to connect to opera? Once we realized, or once I sort of connected to people to the idea that my ancestors communicate to me through song and storytelling and regalia and music, which is what opera does. So in fact, this is the connection between these two cultures. And once we said that, then the community sort of went, "Oh, wait a second, I guess I don't need to know anything about opera, I just need to know about storytelling." And the year wore on, and we had lots of support and lots of community buy-in and lots of reflection on Indigenous language and policing and violence against women. There was a lot of attention paid to it by a lot of different members of the Indigenous community. And when the opera came to be, the first audience was all Indigenous, and it was a very different experience for us. And then when the opera people, and I don't know what else to call them, but the opera people came in, they connected it to it in a very similar way. And the reality is, you can read all the academic papers you want, you can read all the newspaper articles that you want. If you don't feel something about the truth, whether it's hurt or pain or hope or joy, then you will not understand, or you will not learn it. You will not choose to learn it. You might be able to memorize it, you might be able to recall it, but once you feel something about a subject, then you will begin to behave very differently towards that subject. And I think if we look at opera and music and film and literature and painting and sculpture and all of these things as a way to communicate with our descendants, but as a way for us to feel about something in the moment, I think we can start to translate some of this idea of hard truth and behaving like a community. We are in this together has become a very commonly used phrase during this pandemic. But, you know, even before the pandemic, we had crisis. You know, you can look at racism in the healthcare system or in policing. You can look at, you know, water quality in First Nations communities, and all of these things. We're in this together, and we need to understand it in different ways.
Thanks, Ron. And Sharmake, I see you have to go, and thank you so much for being here as long as you could. We will, Trevor and Gertie are going to magically get us all organized into small groups, and hopefully everybody has said where you're from so that we can do that by community. So we're going to take a bit of a break, but don't go far, and just maybe use this time to really consider what you want to bring into your small group discussion in terms of the aspects that the panelists were saying, the aspects of how do we define what wealth is in a different way than has been defined for us? How do we make visible that which we really value when maybe it isn't measured in the usual way? How do we understand how to make sure no one's left behind? How do we understand what community engagement really is, and how do we bring these forth in our policies, in our decision making? How do we bring those forth in our neighborhoods? So, you know, kind of pondering some of these themes and being ready to come into a small group discussion. So we'll just take a bit of a break, and when we come back, I'll just kind of again group you a little bit by giving some overview of small group discussion stuff and reminding you of the theme, and then we'll go in there and you'll have a good 20-30 minutes to be able to talk. And then again, we'll come back and not so much report on what happened, but just, you know, talk about what got generated, what came forth in our, you know, what was exciting, new, or even challenging that came out of our discussion, and share those back into the larger group.